And it seems as if everything else is kind of, disappeared. All other urgent matters like um, wars, conflicts, but also the climate crisis. Some stuff is still being reported on it, but a lot is just kind of dropped down on the news pages towards the kind of the bottom. But also a lot of things have stopped. Like there's no protests anymore. Large global, local, national meetings have been postponed. So there's less to also report about. That's kind of what it seems like. But actually a lot is, of course, still happening. And at the same time, many are pointing towards the positive environmental changes brought about by the corona crisis. And for example, in parts of the world where smog is a huge problem, people are seeing blue skies again for the first time that they never imagined was possible. People are breathing again, like asthma complaints have gone down because of the drop in traffic and factories closing down. Carbon dioxide has dropped in many places in the world, same with aviation and so on. And of course, there's all these pictures of wildlife returning and nature reclaiming urban spaces. Like most of them were fake. The Venice pictures, right, of the swans and the fish and so on. Images and reports of coyotes in San Francisco, of sheep on the streets in towns and so on. More wildflowers leading to more bees because they're not cutting the grass on the side of roads. Apparently it's wildlife is like having the best time. The earth has become more quiet. There's less vibrations because of the decrease in traffic and kind of activity. Bird song, you can hear birds again because man-made sounds are decreasing. But I think it's very important to realize that all these changes come about as a result of tens of millions of people losing their jobs, being pushed into poverty, thousands of people dying, and so on. And it's a very different idea of like, oh, look, all these good things are happening, but at what cost? Like, is this anything that we can even replicate when things ever get back to normal, which they probably won't, but at least this crisis will pass. And also on the other side of the coin, a lot of negative environmental change are happening as well, which seem to be less reported on as usual. So like big oil companies and aviation companies, especially in the US, are being bailed out. Less money is coming into, for example, sanctuaries, like wildlife sanctuaries and so on, because of the drop in tourism, which means that they can't stop poachers and other terrible things happening. Local environmental laws are not being enforced anymore. And also governments are pushing through these unpopular policies because people are distracted by the coronavirus, for example. So overall, the climate crisis is very, very much with us and will continue to be there once the worst of the corona crisis is over, obviously. And I think this is why it's so important to be very aware of everything that's happening, to kind of keep up to date and to review the news that comes out very critically, and also in relation to all these environmental issues. And so much is changing now that it's very hard to keep up with. And some of it lets us experience what a world less reliant on fossil fuels would smell like, for example, or what a less busy world feels like, what it means to slow down your lives and to travel less, and that it's actually possible, right? It might not necessarily make you happy, but it's possible. And other things show the weaknesses of our current system. But I think, however, which way we turn it, this crisis shows us very much the interconnectedness of all things. So that our destruction of the planet, of ecological systems, a loss in biodiversity, eating of animals, global rise in temperature, leads to an increase in, for example, amount of viruses that are able to jump from animals to humans. And it also shows how reliant we are on each other, and that our food and stuff, our things actually come from places, they don't just appear in the supermarket. And that without teachers and nurses and doctors and caregivers and cleaners and Albert Heijn cashiers and bus drivers and so on, everything falls apart. And I think the crisis has jump-started in this way our ability to also imagine how things could be different, because at the moment they are. And we can now imagine things that seemed completely impossible before, like, for example, the air quality increasing in a matter of days, which for some reason people are so surprised at. Like, I had never knew this was even an option. If we stopped driving cars, that their air quality would improve. So people are seeing it, people are actually experiencing it. But also bailouts of people, money being given to people who need it. People being nice to each other, solidarity and so on. And this is all of a sudden happening. And so I think it shows us that change on a very large scale is possible, as long as the kind of the issues are urgent enough. And you would think that the climate crisis is urgent enough, but for some reason it doesn't feel that way. It's nothing compared to the urgency we feel as with the corona crisis. So I think what the most important thing is that what comes out of this crisis is that we know that this is possible. Changes are possible. And it's a very tightrope that we're walking, and that we have to keep very vigilant for the years to come to see how these things play out and what happens. And to just stay wide awake and also continue kind of this fight for ecological and environmental justice. So I'm very curious to hear what you come up with in this debate, and I hope that we could keep addressing these issues at EUC as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Tamara. That's a very nice introduction. I would say we can basically just dive right into it. I like it when everyone has their mics open. We're not that many people, so I think that should help work quite well. Gina, if you could make me host and I could see the hand raises better, that'd be nice. Otherwise, I'm just going to have the participants open on the side.
Yeah.
So I know a few of you. I know Anouk will provide us with very sharp and interesting arguments. So I'm looking forward to that already. So I'll say, let's just go right for it. So what do you guys think is the actual implication of the corona crisis? Will this lead to lasting change, or is this just a thing that's going to be over once we go back to normal? And are we going back to normal? Boris, just go for it. I'm gonna shut you off if you talk over someone else.
Okay. I think it's a good time to assess our we, the people, our hand in this. Like, now is the time to see what our sorry, I need to get a bit into the English and shit, but what our influence. Yeah, what our influence is in this crisis, and how can we do that by assessing what is going good with the environment at the moment, and how we can play into that into our daily lives. Like, how do we really assess what is good to do in the coming daily life from now on? So we don't need to really like set everything in order to change. Like, we need to change everything and all of our lives, but we need to see how we can sneak in some good things we learn right now to implement into our daily lives.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. You do not have to raise your hand in the video. I mean, you can also surely do that, but there's also a feature in Zoom.
Where is that feature?
Normally I can find it in the chat, but now it's nowhere.
No, I can't find it either.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to find it.
Where?
Click on participants in the lower part.
Oh, right.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, everyone got it? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I get a notification once you guys raise your hand. So that's perfect. All right, so you're basically proposing, okay, we have to find out now what is the things that we actually need in our lives. So this crisis shows us that. And you think that in the long run, people will notice what is actually the importance of what we're doing, and thus we'll just do that and not just do all the unnecessary stuff.
it really is a tipping point at the moment. It's not really we know in the future what we have to do, but now is really the point to assess what is good and what we can do to change everything for the better, and show the world we care. Like, that's now. The time is now, because we are in silence at the moment and there are many things happening and it's so different, everything. So now is in the chaos, we need to find some kind of order to implement into our daily lives. And I think that's the most important thing about the crisis at the moment.
Okay, very interesting. Lieke, what do you have to say for that?
What I would like, I want to go into something you said, like you do not necessarily need to change everything at once, but you have to sneak it in. And I think personally, for like, if you want people to actually participate in your changes, then indeed slow change or like sneaky change is better, so to say, because then people are less likely to be resistant against it.
Yeah. Anouk?
Yeah, me?
Yeah, I think you guys can also like just go for it when you know that someone's done. I don't have to like always say names, I think.
Well, something that worries me a lot is not about people and governments realizing that we need massive changes, because I think this was already on the way and now it's just this realization unveiling itself fully. But it's more how do we get there? And there's many ways to do so, and what scares me a lot is that because we can't socialize anymore, we can't strike anymore, it's very hard to be politically involved in a way. I'm scared that then citizens won't get a chance to participate in this discussion on where do we go from now, what do we do, and what is the transition we want to see. And for example, governments bailing out big fossil fuel companies to me is absolutely crazy. But I don't see the way I could fight against that. I don't see the way I could tell governments, why don't you rather invest now in other renewable, for example, energy companies, because that's the time. Fossil fuels are going to disappear, perhaps because we're in this crisis. And that scares me a lot, that now, politics is basically only going to be solely about politicians' decisions.
So, I mean, currently we can't really unite and like people can't come together, that's for sure. So do you think that in the long run, we will get more numb? Because I mean, now, like you see all the things that are happening, we don't really have personal power to change anything, which is basically our power to unite and to meet is completely taken away. So like the few powers that we have in a big state are not there at a given time. So do you think that will actually trickle down in the long run? We will also see that we're not striking a lot anymore, that we're just being okay with what state power and governance is implementing. Do you feel like that's a threat that we're facing?
Not necessarily, because I think some people have the urge to react. Like, I'm French and I know French people will continue striking whatever happens, but it's just like, I don't know how long this is gonna be, you know? So if this is, like, I really don't realize if this is a couple of months or if this is 1 year, 1 year and a half, 2 years. And depending on the time this is gonna take, it can become very dangerous, I think. That, for example, if ever environmental questions are being actually raised, which I hope they will, and transition is being tackled by politicians, the fact that it's only elite politicians that are going to decide how to do that, this is very scary to me. And the fact is, the environmental crisis concerns many people in many different ways. So if, for example, Dutch government decides to bail out Shell so that they solely invest in renewable energies now, that's still allowing monopoly of one company over energy production. That's still not enabling people to produce their own energy. That's a lot of questions that we should be asked as citizens, and that I don't see that happening. And yeah, so that's a big worry of mine.
So how about alternatives to physical protests? Do you see anything already happening? Like, because that can be powerful as well.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of questionings going on in activist groups over digital striking or digital alternatives, but it's hard. So now a lot of it is focused on information and really keeping this a thing through social media and keeping these topics as mainstream topics. But as like forms of really pressuring government yet, I'm not really aware that we have found ways yet. But we need to be creative. Like, it's up to us, and I think it's possible. I mean, we have no choice. I'm not gonna accept that just because I'm stuck at home. Like, I'm not gonna do anything. So we need to come up with something. But yeah, it's much harder, I think.
Do you think this whole situation is like it biggens the problem, like it shows us where are the real problem lies, and it acts like a fast way to see, I don't know how I can say it. It acts like some kind of insulator for the problems that are there already or not. Do you think that's the thing, and that we need to assess that kind of things and see how we can change the real problems that play right now?
Yes, but if you think about it, isn't it also the threat that people don't really mind anymore, because what they're concerned about in the first place is their own wealth, their own comfort. And we're very much currently not able to give everyone the comfort that they're used to. So what I'm actually thinking is going to happen is that people say, okay, we are going to get back that comfort and that economic stability at any cost. So I think actually that will hurt the climate crisis cause in the long run, because people are just going to be more interested in their personal short-run convenience than in the long-run survival of the species or the planet. And I think that's actually the problem. So I'm very much convinced that although we see all these positive impacts now, and people see, okay, this is how it could be, this is being associated with, okay, I'm stuck at home, I'm not really enjoying my life big time right now, so maybe this is not too good after all, and I'd rather have an economy that is running at whatever cost.
Yeah. But also realizing that
what is your stance on that, apart from Anouk?
Well, I honestly think that it can go two ways. So it can go the extreme way in the sense that people are really going to try no matter what to get their comforts back. But on the other hand, I think some people might even realize that, oh, I don't need all these luxurious things that I usually have. So after the crisis, they're going to be more mellow on their consumption. I think that's also a possibility, personally.
So how would we know if they do? Is that just about pessimism? How could we tell? I mean, this is going to be a big experiment after all, but are those the only two voices, or is there?
No, I think there's like a whole spectrum of things, but I'm not sure what it consists of.
I think it all depends on how we go through our own fears. That's the main point, I think, because I see a lot of reaction on fear of all of this, right? What do we need to do, and how can we get our lives back and things? And that's the real thing we need to assess, is how we deal with our fears at the moment. And that maybe could be a good way to drop in some good behaviors to have our climate change for the better. Like, how can we care for our planet, right? That's a good way to, our fears is a good, how we address our fear is a good way to do that.
Because now like these fears surface, so you can really get to them, maybe.
Maybe.
So then how do you frame it as a chance and not as, okay, we want the past back, And how do you change this into, okay, let's take this chance that is given to us from crisis to do good? What is a way to do that?
I'm not sure about like a specific way to do that, but I do think that also what Tamara said at the beginning is also kind of the feeling I've been having when all this went down, is that you now see like in the flesh that huge change is possible. And I think that's kind of a hopeful thing that's come out of this, to see that not just that change is possible, like this huge global change, like when the circumstances are really pressing, that it is possible to act and to act with each other and care for each other. But yeah, still like how exactly is that going to be done? I'm not sure.
I think the greatest, well, two barricades in front of will change in any respect to improving the climate are, first of all, money. I think the people who are in this entire thing for the money, who willfully ignore the impact they have because changing their ways would reduce their profit, for example, Shell. I don't know if they're going to change anything. And I think they're probably the largest players. Well, not necessarily Shell, but all players that just don't care about the long-term effects as long as they are making money. So I'm wondering in to which degree this change will make a difference. There are probably a lot of people who might be awakened by this, but I think that there's also a lot of people who are just willfully ignorant. When I see what's happening with the introduction of 5G basically worldwide, and how people for some reason made the connection between 5G and the coronavirus. I don't know how they did that, but there's a degree of like I don't think like if something like this happens and it shows that things are going better now that people are not on the streets and polluting less, I don't think it will change their minds either. So I think it's a very small group who can actually be influenced by this, because I mean most people who are concerned about the climate are already trying to improve. They are already aware that this would be the case if everyone would contribute to improving the climate, and they are already doing that. So I'm a bit pessimistic or skeptical about the degree of improvement it can even make, especially because I think such a large part of the problem is not about being informed, but rather just not caring.
I actually find that very interesting, because like all of us have at least some touch point with this idea of the climate crisis, right? So we're all kind of aware of that. We all kind of seen some news on what the climate implications of this crisis actually are. And like, okay, we're going to reach our goals of less emissions. We're going to do all of that. But actually, like, if you think about it, that most people who haven't had interactions with that before will mostly just have that drown in the sheer just omnipresence of news about corona and deaths and more infections and okay, vaccine. And are people aware of that? Because I think we're also a very biased group when it comes to that. And we show this awareness, but I think overall in the population, you see it's quieter, that's very evident, but the more broad impacts on the ecosystem, I think is something that people are not entirely aware of. And thus also, it got quieter, that was nice, but it is probably hard, and I think it's important to communicate that as well, to kind of see the picture of what these implications on wildlife are. And yeah, I don't know, it's hard to see that, how like an entire populace will react to that, because I feel the total exposure is corona, And then there's a few things on the side which have like 50% corona. And then what you still read and what sticks is just the sensationalist parts of it.
Yeah,
And
but
don't you think that?
Yeah?
No, go.
Robert, go ahead.
But don't you think that's gonna change over the next couple of months once, you know, certain levels are kind of down? I mean, we're already seeing that in Italy and Europe. The US is also slowly coming down. And after all, it's kind of bound to at least the attention span is gonna change, or the attention towards other things is gonna open up again, because you know it's just something that people live with, and whether they're living at home or not, I don't think that's gonna make a difference. And I think I want to say, so towards all the previous points, is that I think we're focusing a lot on, okay, what can we do as individuals and how will individuals change? But I think what this crisis really shows is how much government action is actually possible, rather than you know, the individuals making a difference. Because as an individual, you're confined to the system that you're living in, and that currently is capitalism. But like, as most of us probably know, is that capitalism doesn't really enable a sustainable future. So I wonder how much government action, or what kind of government actions could be useful to take care of this crisis. For example, you guys mentioned some oil companies. They're really cheap right now because the shale oil prices are down. So what if governments just bought up all the oil companies, and through the taxpayer money basically forced them to start truly investing in environmental energies?
Well, they're lowering extraction now already, huh? Like they're agreeing, like most countries, oil countries. So things, and I think this is important to Yes's point with change. So things have already changed. Maybe individuals haven't changed, but things after this are not the same as they were before. And I think it definitely very much has to do with how the government is also interfering and is imposing change. I mean, we're all inside, where most of us aren't seeing other people. We've all adapted the ways that we live over the past few weeks. And whatever happens, this will have happened. And this will mean some kind of change, even if things won't go back to normal completely. It's impossible. So things have changed and will continue to change. And I think it's important to also see what that means, and how this can also made to match the aims of environmental justice, for example, and how those can be brought together.
But also I usually don't trust companies really, but also for companies to change their business model, it makes so much sense now, because everyone is realizing that we're so not resilient as a society, and global crises are just going to happen more and more. Like, this is just a preview of what the next decades and centuries probably are going to look like. And so as a company, it makes sense that you adjust your business model to be more resilient. And of course that comes with considerations about the environment, because the climate crisis is one of the most threatening crises we're facing already. And so I strongly believe that the government has a big role, but I think even outside of the government, some companies are going to start shifting of way of thinking, just because otherwise they're at threat, and otherwise they won't make money. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, I'm very curious.
The thing that I'm kind of worried about is that some companies do indeed care about transitioning to a more sustainable way of producing or providing certain things. But then there's always the issue that there is a certain way that isn't sustainable, in which the company can probably increase their profits. And why would a certain company choose for the more sustainable option, whilst he or she, like the owner of the company, can think, oh, but maybe I have competition that will do it in unsustainable ways, which will improve their profit. But and I then kind of how do you say it, like you inhibit yourself. So why would they do that? From an economical standpoint,
I mean, that would only work with government intervention, like just
Yeah.
like regulating what is possible and what isn't. But I'm kind of struggling to see how out of this crisis governments, I mean, we see, like, I find it quite interesting that it's absolutely true what you said, Robert, that we see what governments are capable of. But I'm just wondering what the incentive would be if most people have the wish to have their jobs back, what the incentive would be to impose heavier regulation to strengthen ecological issues. Like, why would you impose heavier regulation if that means that less people can get back into their jobs? Like, I think that it could be possible, but I don't know why most governments of the world, especially the US, would impose regulation like that at the given moment. I think in the long run, they will certainly think about that like you have to consider future crises, but I don't see most big governments of the world being interested in that.
I think,
And especially in the Western world, when it's like, okay, we want to have some short-term success. Like I could maybe even like in an industrial giants like China, where like the general culture is a little bit more long-term, to see, okay, yeah, it makes sense here to have these regulation in place, but I don't see it in the US. Like very much not at all. And then the rest of the West will not really be able to not follow that, right? Because if US companies who are very much present on a European market are able to be very much more profitable than European companies with imposed regulation on sustainability, like how are they able to compete on a big scale? Like that's not going to be possible, right?
so to the very beginning of what you said, I think the main assumption is that the imposed regulations would, and I think this is at the beginning, like you're pointing this at the beginning, that extra imposed regulations would keep people from getting back to work, but I don't think that necessarily has to be that way. So I mean, yeah, overall extra regulations will change business and how it's run, but that's the point. So that's the whole point, right? The whole point is that you need to change that whole system to and that whole business model. And I mean, you're seeing some of that where, so I think a couple of countries have started to introduce their main policy target not being GDP growth, but rather being, I think, citizen welfare or happiness or something like that. So these are things that people are going towards, and so one of the big things that could change how this whole business is run would be, for example, right, the universal basic income, which is even in the US currently heavily considered. I mean, right now they're sending $1,200 or so to every person, which is, I mean, a joke as a relief because you can't do much with that as a one-time payment, but it's something to as a start, as like this would have especially in this administration, this would have never been seen possible, that the government just sends you a check and all of a sudden this is happening just because, well, there's an immediate crisis. And I think well, currently you're seeing all this action because, yeah, politicians are scared for their constituents' life, and that will directly affect them and their voting behavior. So and now, yeah, I wonder how much I think what it comes down to will be how much of a threat or immediate threat will politicians see the climate issue as in the coming years, and they
That's
will act accordingly.
Anouk just is first, I think.
Yeah, the last point you made, it's what I want to respond to directly. Climate is something that's the average of the last 30 years. For me, like the changes we're seeing now because of the coronavirus, they're basically a told you so moment. But I don't really feel like I can even say it to anyone who didn't agree, because the proof was already there that we're messing up the climate. And I like, if you look at the graphs, the maps, the data from meteorology institutes, NASA, anything, they all show the same thing, and the climate is changing, and not in a good way. If you look at the last few years, every heat record in almost every country has been broken in every summer, years in a row. So I don't know if like this has the magnitude it needs to really show governments, companies, but also individuals, I think just society in general, that we need to change. Because yes, the corona crisis is very immediate for everyone. There's no exception, and I think almost everyone realizes that. But the climate crisis, because it is per definition something that takes 30 years to see the true effect of what we're doing now. I think a lot of people are just not a lot of companies, a lot of businesses are just not interested in looking that far ahead, because in 30 years so much can change. If you're thinking 30 years ahead, and I'm saying 30 years, but obviously after 15 years the average of the last 30 years will have changed too. But I think just the scale of the climate crisis doesn't seem immediate enough to the parties who need to change. I think that we do see that governments can make a difference, but I don't know if they will realize that that is what they need to do for the climate. I see why they act like this for the corona crisis, but I don't see how that would also entail that they would think, oh, maybe we should do this too for the climate crisis.
Anouk, did you still have your point?
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, because you both say that you don't know if the government will act in the same way as they do with this crisis to deal with the climate crisis. But I mean, it's up to us that this happens. It's not like we don't have any ways to influence the governments, and now we're seeing actually that when they consider something as a crisis, they act upon it. And so yeah, it's up to us to make them act towards the climate crisis as a crisis as well. And it's not like the government is not an independent entity that is not influenced by anything. Like, and I mean, history has proved that social movements shape government action, and to me this is the moment more than ever, because we've been proof that it's possible that the government interferes with what we see, what seemed as something that was just almost natural and impossible to change. And from one day to another, we don't go to school or work anymore. People, like, international trade is almost off. Like, all of this can be interrupted, and because it is, we have to start thinking in ways of making sure that this is going to happen. Because also the climate crisis, we're talking about something that we have 10 years basically to change. Like, we have 10 years to become carbon neutral before we go into situations when all ice on Earth is gonna go away. Albedo effect is not gonna be a thing, and we're gonna live circumstances that we haven't lived on this planet since I don't know how many, like, thousands of years. So it's not a 30-year plan. This is a crisis, and it's an emergency, and it's a 10-year one maximum. And so yeah, to me the focus now is like, okay, now we if we have the privilege to not struggle too much economically and have time to think about these things, a big question that we should raise is, okay, how do we make sure that what comes after this ends, whatever, like confinement ends, if ever it ends soon, is how do we make sure that it becomes first agenda priority?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting also because the climate crisis and corona crisis are quite similar in the way that they're both global, right? They're not just someone's problem, they're everyone's problem. And that maybe kind of shows as well that there is the possibility to
I can't hear you.
No, I think your sound is gone.
Anywhere.
and now should be back. Can someone say
Yeah.
something?
Yes, you're back.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, got it.
Mm,
Okay, what did I miss?
we just missed you.
Yeah.
Completely.
I'm not sure. It was like a few seconds.
Whatever. The essence of my point was both crises are global. It shows us what global cooperation can look like and what we can do for problems of that scale. And I find that very interesting. And that maybe also means, okay, what we before never thought possible of global cooperation is now possible. And now like we can have a discussion about that, I think. Jess, I think you also had your hand up. I don't know if that's still relevant. Otherwise, I'm going to give it to Lika.
Yes, sir.
Oh no, I lowered it.
Okay. All right.
So what I wanted to say is currently, yes, we are treating the coronavirus crisis in quite a serious way, but I also want to say that this way of doing it is not sustainable. So, for example, yes, we are seeing like big changes now, and we're actually taking a lot of measures against it. But for example, in the US, currently more people have lost their jobs right now after a few weeks of crisis than they have done in the entire economic recession. So in that sense, it's not sustainable for people because they cannot provide for themselves anymore, so to say. And in like considering the climate crisis, we have to find a way to, in a sustainable way, take measures. And therefore, I feel like it cannot really be treated in the same way as the coronavirus, because we have to find a way that is like achievable and sustainable for over a long period of time, like for an eternity, so to say.
I think there's a big solution in addressing that the government is not really the government, right? Like they sitting in their chairs and deciding things, but we are the government. And I think that in everything I heard, that there is some kind of idea that we are against the government, but now is the time to address that we are the government and that we the people are the main asset in what government is. So I think it's a good thing that we need to come into some kind of protest to show them we are like the most important asset in the government. And I don't know how or what we must do to do that, but I think that's a big solution to show the people in the government we are the government, like we are the most important.
What do you mean with we?
The society, like everybody who works for a company makes the government tick, right? And now we see like everything falls apart, like every big company or every small company has some kind of change which make the normal society, like the economy, different from what it was before. But now we need to, with each other, we need to like sit around the table with everyone and say like everyone is important in this system. And I think that's the biggest hurdle we must overcome.
Yeah, I think.
Ike, real quick, Jesse had his hand up for a while now,
sorry.
so I think it's his turn first.
Yeah, to add to what Lieke said before Boris, the way the corona crisis is being handled, although it's necessary, it's not sustainable for the society at all. There's no way the way we're living now could like be prolonged in the same way indefinitely to combat the climate crisis. The main things that are being changed is everyone has to stay inside, everyone has to take distance from each other, no traveling, things like that. Those could indeed probably change the climate for the better, but it's not sustainable for the economy, for the people themselves, for the governments. And while I definitely agree with everyone who spoke before me and says we do need to see how we can change this, and we do need to see how we can take this moment to figure out a way to move forward after this has happened. But I think it's a very dangerous thought to take this and basically make it an example and say this is the told you so moment that all governments have to see. Because if we do that, they can just, and I'm saying the governments again, but all the people who vote for the governments and all the companies, they will just say, yes, we saw a change, but the change made things like other things so much worse that it doesn't outweigh the goods that it has done for the climate. And I actually think that the things that are changing as a direct result of these measures are mostly bad, and the positive side of it, that the climate is seeing immediate improvement for some reason, it's nice. But if we take that as an example, it's almost like saying, yeah, the only way to change the climate is to basically just shut down the human race as a mobile globalist thing. And I don't think that anybody, even climate activists, are going to say, yeah, that's a good idea. So what I'm a bit wary of is, while this could be seen as something positive, if we take it as some kind of example or an extremely positive thing and say this is what we can do, so this is what we must do, then we're giving off a very unsure and quite frankly dangerous message to anyone who's against it, first of all. But I think it's also not going to be good for the people who actually care, because it's in the long term it's just not sustainable. So my concern is how can we use this this opportunity without jeopardizing the entire movement entirely. Yeah.
Okay, so what I want to ask Boris or add to Boris's statement is by the way, Gabriela, I don't know what the sound is, but there's a sound. Sorry. So what I want to ask to Boris is do you not mean that instead of we are the government, that we are all political actors active in the political environment? I think that's what you meant, right?
Yeah, really, I think that's the point I wanted to make. Indeed, maybe it was not worded like that kind of way, but indeed we are everybody is some kind of
influence
cog in the machine, right? And now I think that's what I disagree about. Not really disagree, but I think we don't need to really, what Jesse say is we don't need to take this moment and see it as an example to change everything, right? Or something. What do you mean by what you say yesterday?
Well,
Yeah.
if we just like take the changes we see,
Yeah.
like the positive changes we see because of the measures against the corona crisis, so
Yeah.
that everyone stays inside, so less travel. We see that the sky clears up. If we say, look, this is what happens when we take measures, and we give that as a proof that measures work, we're just saying that extreme measures that also have very negative side effects work. We're not proving that, well, the measures, you know, I don't even know which measures I could give as an example, because it's that complex. But these measures are extreme, very extreme, and I think the downsides of these measures grossly outweigh the positives, which are the positive changes in the climate. So I think it's a bit of a well, I'm just a bit conflicted about taking this and saying, okay, so this is the proof that measures work, because yes, it is, but it's also the proof that measures can be, well, devastating to many people's jobs, lives, social lives, everything, because it also has that impact.
We need to make it like tactful, like we need to think about what we do and not doing something like, oh, this works, so let's do that. Yes, that's what I agree.
Yeah, you can call it eco-fascism, right? So you say, I mean, there's these points that say you have to, the environmental consequence, the only way to make this work is to maybe, for example, reduce the world's population. Right, so you know, and reducing population, not euphemism for saying, well, people either have to die or whatever. So, if any positive consequence that comes from thousands, 10,000 people dying, losing their jobs, and so on, that's not a solution that we can live with. That's not something that we can replicate in any way. So that's not what we can do with this. And I think that's what you mean.
Yeah, that's definitely what I mean.
Away from, and you know, that's, you cannot, sometimes we tend to think this way, even like subconsciously, like, oh, you know, good thing that, you know, the skies clear out, you know, and like, I forgot who said it, you know, this will show them, you know, it told you so and stuff. And this is also already the beginning of very dangerous thoughts of saying, you know, this should have happened. The only way to get the point across is for this to have happened, which is saying people had to die before this could be addressed, and that's bullshit, of course.
Yeah, agree.
It would be like getting hit by a car, breaking all your bones, and then saying, "At least I'm alive." Yeah, it's nice that you're still alive, but the negative downsides don't really outweigh the fact that you're still alive. I mean, I would be happy with it, but I would rather not have been hit by that car. And that's. Yeah, if we would say, okay, these measures, we're extending them in some way, we are reducing international travel, which would be extremely effective to reduce the carbon dioxide emission and stuff like that. I think there could be ways. I'm definitely not that pessimistic that I think there's no solution to it. I'm convinced that we could possibly solve the crisis if we all work together, but if we're careless with it and just only look at the positive effects without looking at the downsides, we're just going to destroy ourselves in some other way.
Yeah, and particularly those groups that are already
minorities.
The community suffering the most. So this is, you know, based on racial inequality, gender inequality, and you see this with the coronavirus, you see this with the climate crisis. Those are the groups that already suffer the most. If you say we're going to reduce air travel, this means that many people lose their jobs, and it's not going to have a great effect on the richest in the world. It's going to have an effect on the poorest of the world. And I think this is, you know, also the interconnectedness of all these issues.
But it could be a way we can address like the pace of some regulation. Like we can take this situation and make it like some kind of, we can make the situation address the pace of the government regulation. Like there is something to say for quicker like decision making in our government from this situation, and maybe it is bad for some people because we make fast decisions at the moment, but it could also be in this kind of world where everything is fast-paced. It's like economically everything must be here for, in like when we go on internet and have a package, we must get it the next day, right? I think that could be a way we can go with government. Like we need to make it more fast-paced because there are more people, so more things that have impact or things. I think that could also be something we could look out for, like maybe or something.
I mean, I agree for sure that political decision making needs to be faster on the part of the environmental crisis, but I do not think it should be at the cost of minorities. So let's say, so I think that all the risks should still be like evaluated very very in depth. But I just feel like the climate crisis needs to go up on the political agenda, so to say. So there needs to be more attention to it, so that it can be faster. It shouldn't go faster because you choose to like do less research, for example.
Yeah, Gina, you have something to say.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what you guys think on. I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's this, because now we're kind of talking about about this like fast kind of decision making, and how that we see now that these harsh measures that are being taken also have a lot of negative consequences. That kind of we need to find like an in-between way of actually making decisions without kind of neglecting the consequences of it. But there are already like models and theories of how to like do economy differently, basically. For example, the donut economy. I don't know if anyone has heard of that. But it's basically this model that kind of takes into account people as well as the environment. I don't know how to explain it in detail well. You can Google it, like it's very well explained. But that is actually already being implemented in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is like the first city to kind of adopt this form of economy because of what they've seen happening now in the corona crisis, that we are just not resilient as a society and as a community. So I'm just interested to see what you guys think, like because there are already kind of alternatives that do take into account environment and already marginalized and vulnerable groups of people. And I do think in that respect, because also like Jesse, what you were saying, that people are kind of now taking this corona crisis as an example of like, see, if we do this, then it's all going to be fine. I absolutely do not think we should do that, but I do think that it provides kind of this space for change, and to kind of see already cities like Amsterdam doing that and implementing this new thing, I think is super interesting. And it doesn't have to be this not thought through fast decision making of, okay, let's just do this and then just see what happens. Like there are already models like that out there. So
okay, very interesting. Let's dive into the systems or economy argument. And I think that it could also just be like a really nice way to close it off, because a lot of people are already leaving. So I think let's have a short discussion on that and then kind of round it up. So Jesse, what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that the for example, the donut economy model, but also other models that have been proposed, the thing with them is they haven't been proven on a large scale yet. Some of them have seen success, but if I'm just looking at a person like Trump, who is definitely not insignificant at in the global economy. He has a lot of his wealth invested in the current, well, just completely what's it called again? Capitalist system that we've been living by for a while, and it's been proven to be effective for people like him, and it's been proven to be effective for a lot of other people, definitely on the short term. I think there needs to be a radical change in how we view our economy, but I think looking at a crisis that is not necessarily related, because the corona crisis isn't directly related. The changes in the climate that we see, or the weather patterns that we see, are a result of the changes that are needed for corona, not necessarily the other way around. I think if we're looking at other models for economy, the donut model that also focuses on the ecological and social aspect of things rather than just wealth, which is the main difference in to my knowledge. I think the focus should be more on looking just at those things rather than taking this as a good example, the corona crisis. Because I think if we focus on those economic models, we can gain a lot more, I think. But it's a difficult thing to predict, of course. But I think that's a way better approach than taking this as an example. Sure, there are aspects to what the governments can do, and I think Robin made Boris. I don't know why I said Robin. Boris made a very good point that it does prove that the government can take quick action, and that's something. Even if we just completely abstract it from what the actions were, we see that they can do it. And if we combine that with the economic models that, for example, in Amsterdam are proven to be successful, but also if we just look at countries like Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, they all have way more socialist and sustainable business models as a whole country. I don't understand why countries aren't looking at them already. But if we would look at those countries and those models, I think we could reach a lot more than just by taking the corona crisis.
Pretty easy to say because they're not self-sustained, right? I mean, Switzerland is very much run by foreign money. Norway is pretty much wealthy because of oil in the North Sea. So it's not entirely that it just functions in itself. So maybe that's something we need to tackle.
They are also, like the countries I named are also in the top 5 most environmentally friendly and sustainable countries.
I mean, like the system that they have is not sustainable in itself. Like they are more sustainable than other countries, but like the system is not entirely stable, right? If these like influxes from outside would fall away.
I'm not knowledgeable enough about where the money is coming from for Switzerland. I know that it's mostly from the rest of the world, but for Scandinavia and other countries, I'm not sure about that. So I'll have to take your word for that.
Yeah, for Norway, it's like I think the biggest company there is Statoil, which is now called Equinor or something, and they give out the licenses for the oil platforms in the North Sea, and they have quite some riches there. So like that's always the case. Like they can finance a very social system by a lot of wealth that is being generated from resources, and they do it in a good way because there's a lot of countries in the world that have a lot of resources, but that is used to its fullest. So I'm not entirely sure about Sweden or Denmark.
I think Norway is lower on the list than Sweden and Denmark by far. So
I'm not sure because Norway recently has made like a very big transition towards hydroelectricity, I think, in the fjords, and I think therefore they at least have less emission of their energy.
And Norway is number 14 on the 2018 Environmental Performance Index.
Yeah, but it's like
I mean, they have a lot of hydro, but I mean, like there's still a lot of oil in the country.
Yeah, okay.
That is being harvested. So
Where are they going
just
to
like
stop?
where like how they can finance a system like that. That's something that I find interesting.
Yeah.
Because we have to like when we're talking about okay, what systems might be sustainable, not just in a ecological way, but also in a economic way for the future. Then looking at these countries is always interesting, but only if we take into account the reasons why these systems are so stable and are functioning in the way that they are there. Because certainly we could not make the entire world Switzerland or the entire world Norway, and we'd be good.
I think that's also well, that's maybe another debate. The first world countries versus the second and third world countries. How like if the West wouldn't exist, the climate crisis would probably just be resolved in a few weeks. But yeah, I think that a lot of those well, the countries we mentioned, they are also really invested in trying to improve their environmental sustainability, in contrast with, for example, the United States, who is like 27th on the list, which is quite low for a first world country, I would say. So
Are
yeah.
they? Are they?
Yeah, I don't know. It's also always difficult with lists like these because they are usually made by Westerners. So yeah, I don't know, but that's a discussion I think we should save for another time.
Okay, very interesting. Do we have anyone who wants to like slash in to the economic argument? Because there's always some interesting arguments coming, but I don't know how far we can get here. So, any last remarks? Lewis, how about you? Do you have something on your lips?
I think in the end we need to have someone who can address these kind of long-term problems, like in the government, like a lot more, like a long-term planner or something for our government. Like we need to implement it. I don't know how to really. Yeah, like someone who looks at this kind of crises and things, and yeah, who like really knows more about how to improve change and that kind of thing. I don't know how I can say.
I'd say a team of people rather than just one person.
Yeah.
Stick to you. No, I really think and agree with this. Like we should go more in the direction of a technocracy.
Okay, very, very interesting closing statement right there. So short recap, we kind of concluded this crisis shows us what we are capable of with global cooperation, what governments are actually empowered to do. Shows us also what the ecological positives are of really setting ourselves back a little, like going a step back a little, and what can actually be there. Also kind of what we're scared about, that people want to go back into the state as it was before and maybe not that interested in the long-term positives of facing the climate crisis today. And in the end, the conclusion is we will probably need a new system and we need governments to listen to their constituents. So the classical conclusion, it's in the hands of everyone. So very beautiful to end like that. I really enjoyed this, I gotta say. It's an interesting discussion, especially in these times, which are very exciting. And I was very glad that all of you were here. Also with very, very nice arguments and very interesting discussion. So yeah, I don't know, Gina, do you want to take it from here and do like a last closing statement?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would just want to say thank you all so much for being here. It was a super interesting discussion to kind of hear everyone with their different views and opinions, and I think it went really well. I also want to thank you, Felix, for beautifully guiding the discussion. I think that really helped.